Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this panel. So I can start with a quick round of introduction about myself, and then I'll turn it over to you, Frida. So I'm Natesh. I'm currently a lead data scientist at Finicity, which is a Mastercard company. We focus on building open banking data products, which basically are targeted towards improving the financial lives of our customers. Prior to this, I spent close to 3 years at JP Morgan Chase, developing and mostly validating machine learning models for underwriting, marketing, and fraud. So that being said.
Yeah, and I introduced myself earlier. I'm the CEO and founder of Pymetrics, and prior to that, I was an academic scientist for 10 years. And he apparently validated Pymetrics at JP Morgan, so we were bonded.
Awesome. So today we're talking about AI and regulation of AI. So I think the first question we can probably start off with is, what are the biggest challenges, roadblocks you're seeing in the adoption of AI?
Well, I honestly think that a lot of the roadblocks we see, and this isn't just us, I think it's generally accepted, is honestly just human resistance to AI. So when I was at the World Economic Forum a couple years ago, I saw this guy named Eric Brynjolfsson speak. He's a Stanford economist. And he's basically saying that the AI technology is actually ready to be deployed, but many times people are unwilling or unable or whatever to really change their business models to actually deploy AI. And so I think that actually just human resistance to doing so, I think is probably one of the biggest challenges. Not that tech doesn't work, it's mostly just, and human resistance, I think, comes from a variety of different sources. I think it comes from, concerns, valid, some very valid, some maybe less so, needing to change business models, like people just not wanting or not having the desire to really change business models so that they could adopt AI, in many different places. But it feels like every time I go to an AI conference, that's all people talk about is just like, oh, it's so hard to get it adopted inside. So,
yeah.
But what do you see?
I definitely think I agree with most of what you said, but I think one other important factor I'm seeing is like just the fact that there's a lack of awareness in some where some of the business stakeholders might not be very familiar with AI and what it does, because a lot of times it's seen as a black box. Hey, it's this all powerful, unwieldy black box which can really do harm as well as good. But I think it's just a matter of like getting aware of the technology, understanding it, going beneath actually what is on the surface, and actually understanding the benefits of it to actually.
Yeah, I have this joke that AI is like teenage sex. Like everyone says they're doing it, but nobody really knows what it is. And I think that's very accurate. A lot of times when you start talking about it, you really understand. Like there's just so many different definitions of it that people don't really. And then I think there's always been resistance to new technology. So apparently, when the steam engine came along, I don't know, 100 plus years ago, women were told not to ride steam engines because their uteruses could fly out of their bodies because they went so fast. And I think we're kind of at that phase a little bit with AI, which, sort of links back to some of the earlier talks we had today, where there's a lot of, I would say, extreme concern in a way that I don't think is particularly warranted. But I think there are also just lots of bad examples of deployment that sort of feed that concern, right?
Yeah, and I think in most cases, bad news, makes the front page, whereas the good news really comes on the third or fourth page.
Completely, yeah. I'll never forget. Like they asked me to write an op-ed for Fast Company, where it was like 7 ways to build ethical AI. This was several years ago, and it was a good news story. But and then it literally like no one clicked on the article. But of course, if you have an article of like AI discriminates against poverty, everyone's like, oh, like so. I definitely think there's a tendency to always, unfortunately, gravitate towards bad news. So,
awesome, thank you. Anybody in the audience like to share their thoughts on roadblocks or options to AI in their organizations?